Red Bull Stratos, that must have been an extraordinary thing to be involved with.
A relatively mad project. Everyone knows the numbers, everyone knows the sort of achievements, but at the time it was something which was sort of cobbled together in a desert, held together by gaffer tape. No one really knew how big it was going to be.
Probably the content piece that has the most impact was captains.
While at FIFA, if you're going to commission something, FIFA had to have a reason for telling the story, and we really wanted stuff that was kind of right in the wheelhouse of kind of a story that could only really properly be told by FIFA, and Captains was that. The initial series followed 6 captains through qualification to the 2022 Qatar World Cup. We started having conversations with Netflix. The documentary is amazing. Like, it was one of the things I'm probably most proud of.
Yeah, and then you couldn't have thought the story. And you know, you can plan and plan and plan, but to have Leo Messi win the World Cup when you've been tracking him for so long, I mean, that's an extraordinary outcome for you.
It shows the value of working with talent in a way that you're their partner and they're a stakeholder. E1's a good example of that, isn't it? Where you leverage talent, you leverage celebrity, but you do it in a way where they're a partner, a stakeholder, rather than just a commercial transaction happening. Relatively late notice, we were told that we were the rights holder for Brazil. We scratched our heads for a bit and then came up with an approach of partnering with Ronaldo, so we would co-stream on FIFA Plus and his Twitch platform. He's in a unique position where a Brazilian player can score 2 goals in a match. Ronaldo can text him. Brazilian player finishes the game, sees a text from Ronaldo, oh, I've got to go down to Ronaldo's studio. Just walks out of the dressing room wearing his stocks and the rest of his kit, and kind of then goes and sits on Ronaldo's knee and does an interview live on Twitch and live on FIFA Plus.
Welcome back to Playback Pioneers, the podcast where industry change makers pass the mic to one another to keep the conversation moving forward on the future of playback, storytelling, and content technology. I'm Laurence Hodgson from 5V Video, and I'll be kicking things off before handing over to our newest host in the relay. So in our last episode, we had Patrick Costello. He's the Senior Director of Business Development at Qualcomm. He stepped into the host seat to interview our very own Laurence Boyd, Chief Content and Product Officer at E1 Series. And Laurence, you'll be pleased to know this is going to be the last time I'll allude to us sharing the same name. I think our listeners will be pleased about that too. But what do they talk about? Well, they explored how this new electric powerboat racing league is creating something totally fresh at the intersection of sport, storytelling, and technology. So from data and AI-driven production to the irreplaceable human element in sport, the conversation spotlighted the challenges and thrill of building a new format from scratch. They also touched on immersive tech, audience engagement, and how innovation and location are central to the E1 vision. If you missed it, definitely go back and give it a listen. But today, Laurence Boyd is now stepping into the host role, and he's joined by someone who's played a massive part in shaping the digital voice of sport over the last decade, and that is James Abraham. James has led digital and audience strategy across everything from Channel 4's Paralympics Breakfast and BT's Sports Premier League and rugby coverage to ICC World Cups, the Commonwealth Games, and more. He's an executive producer, a content strategist, and someone who truly gets how to connect storytelling with real-time audiences at scale. So, Laurence, it's over to you. I'll be back at the end of the discussion with some quick-fire questions to close us out. Enjoy.
Thank you, Laurence. Hi, James. How you doing?
Hello, mate. Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. Good to see you. So I wanted to start actually around about where we first met, or when we first met, which was in 2012, and a project that you've just come off. This podcast is called Pioneers, and the project you just come off was pioneering in more ways than one. So Red Bull Stratos, that must have been an extraordinary thing to be involved with.
Yeah, a relatively mad project. I mean, you look back at it now and everyone knows the numbers, everyone knows the sort of achievements, but at the time it was something which was sort of cobbled together in a desert, held together by gaffer tape, and no one really knew how big it was going to be. I think in the end, like, we got lucky really, because the balloon originally was going to go up on the Wednesday before the Sunday. It eventually did. but a massive gust of wind basically tore through it while it was there. And we're pleased it did in the end, because it showed all of the servers were falling down. We didn't put enough CDN technology behind it. We didn't realize how big it was going to be. So thankfully, come Sunday, we were in a much better place, and obviously people know the rest of the story.
So do you think that was the sort of first made for internet TV event?
I mean, yeah, probably. Like within the sort of broader sports sphere, yeah, I think so. And kind of, I think everyone was quite surprised by how big it was. Given it's, it seems a bit niche when you talk about skydiving, doesn't it? But it was a real spectacle, and I think it speaks volumes of the Red Bull brand. I think they still do this really well. They're kind of pioneer in that space that is kind of wow moment content. I think it was just the combination of a lot of different things kind of went really right.
And was that your first steps into the world of digital?
No, I think, well, tracking back a little bit, I used to work in sort of factual entertainment television, and I think I was probably one of the first people in the country to have multi-platform in their title, who worked for an indie, and that was a company called 24, and we did a lot of things with Channel 4 and the BBC in particular, where we'd have a straight commission, and the broadcaster would want kind of some sort of digital multi-platform offering off the back of it, and that's the team I ran at 24, and that went from video diary projects of 2012 Paralympians, which was kind of one of the big ones at the time. And that was we took 35 Team GB Paralympians and kind of gave them video cameras and sort of remotely produced them to produce content about themselves, about their training, about their family. And that went really well, and lots of that content then got used in the broadcast of the games as well, because it was kind of intimate, credible, authentic, really good tone of voice. And I think that was one of the things that made Channel 4 kind of stand apart from what the BBC used to do with the Paralympics coverage.
So that was where we first met, the 2012 Paralympics. I was working for Sunset and Vine, who would later be your employers.
Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary thing to be involved with. Looking back, pretty groundbreaking. Obviously, on the crest of the wave of the Olympics, which had preceded. But what was your experience of that 2012 games like?
I mean, it was kind of magical in a way. Like, so I was working really closely with Channel 4 originally for 2-4, and then as a freelancer. And I was one of the people that kind of went round to various different sports authorities to kind of introduce Channel 4 and the brand and kind of what they wanted to do with the Paralympics. And I think it's fair to say, people were not that receptive. It had been on the BBC for years, and I think people were really concerned about how Channel 4 were going to sort of take it and move on with it. And I think it was great to be part of kind of quelling all those fears. And I think everyone gets a real kind of warm glow out of having worked on Channel 4's coverage of it. And it's amazing that a channel like that can sort of bring everything to bear on something like the Paralympics. And I think it's testament to them that they took it really, really seriously. And it was like a, full suite of everything.
It was quite extraordinary. I think that the moment where I realised it was going to be very different from the sports productions I'd done before was when I think Jay Hunt individually got involved in the choice of the theme music.
Yeah.
And it went from what could have been quite a sterile, po-faced, maybe like at risk of not being entertainment, to something really quite different. I mean, the campaign about the what were they, Superhumans?
Yeah.
Campaign, and then the theme music with the rap song. What was it called again? I forget, but it was really it was a big turning point, I think, in the way that disability sport had been covered.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably only Channel 4 could do that. I think they really kind of lived their values, which I think were long established, and they displayed them elsewhere across their output. But it was absolutely brilliant that they brought all of that swagger and all of that kind of need to do things differently to something like the Paralympics. And, they did it again 4 years later. And Jay Hunt actually came out to Rio. She was with us throughout the whole production out there. So, top to bottom, they took it really, really seriously, and they brought loads of talent to Rio as well, which was, you know, pretty insane. You know, people like Johnny Vegas kind of just wandering around creating great content. You know, watching the ping pong. You know, floods of tears when Will Bailey got his gold medal. You know, these things I will remember forever.
Yeah, it was full of incredible memories. But stepping back just slightly, I remember when there was an edict from Channel 4 that 50% of the presenters were going to be disabled, and that caused some ripples
It was
in the traditional world of sports production.
It was great. I loved it. I was quite involved in their training with someone called James Bellardi, who's a good friend of mine now. Um, I thought it was fantastic, and I think the ripples it caused, I think, were exactly the right ones. And I know I wasn't with Sunset and Vine at the time, and I know they were the ones. You know, they would have been one of the ones who were very, very concerned about it. But it was exactly the right decision. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting that I mean, TV producers are generally quite risk averse, particularly sports ones. I think you know, our job really is to showcase the sports, and not take risks. But Channel 4 really challenged Sunset and Vine and IMG at the time, and all the other production companies involved. And I think the results speak for themselves. I think the whole suite of shows, not just the live sports coverage, but particularly the shows around the edges. So the last leg being notable, as a really groundbreaking bit of television. But then you went on, as you said, to 2016 Paralympics with Sunset and Vine, and you created the breakfast show with Lee Mackenzie and RJ Mitter. How did you balance the sort of inclusivity and entertainment in that, and making a show for a general sports audience or a general consumer audience, not just a niche and sports audience?
well, we were the team that were kind of cursing when Team GB would get a late night swimming medal because it meant we had to include that in our edit. You know, it was one of those sort of edits that finished at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, like every single day. Um, Channel 4 kind of landed loads of great talent on us, which was fantastic, but obviously a challenge to fit everything in. RJ Mitty was one of the biggest actors in the world at the time on the back of the success of Breaking Bad. So he was, you know, he was brilliant to have there, but you couldn't walk 50 meters with him in the park to get to a filming location without him being swamped by people. Um,
Mm.
so it was challenging, but like challenging in the right kind of way. You know, it was pretty fast turnaround edits. I had a really good team, you know, but it was very late nights, kind of lots of apologies for kind of how late it was going to be from me to the team, but you know, everyone kind of stepped up and really delivered on it.
And around that time as well, Sunset and Vine became the production partner for BT Sport,
Yeah,
and there were some extraordinary groundbreaking shows. I think the rugby club show,
Rugby
and then
Tonight.
also, yeah, Rugby Tonight, and also, so I want to talk about Rugby Tonight a bit, but also I really want to talk about what BT Sport did with clips on social, which I'm sure you're involved with, because before BT Sport, Sky had put none of their rights content on social at all. And BT Sport did exactly the opposite. They put the goals up nearly as they went in.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to know how that conversation went, and what was going on in the minds of the executives at
Yeah.
BT Sport.
So I joined Sunset and Vine on the back of that win for them. So I wasn't with the business until that point, but I was part of their pitching team, and the understanding was if they were to be successful, then I would come in and start a kind of a multi-platform team within Sunset and Vine. And the brief from BT Sport was a tricky one because you've got a brand new channel starting behind a paywall with exactly zero audiences. So the strategy was kind of a shop window one where you had to show what you've got. You had to show kind of the rights you've got, the talent you've got, and you have to be quite aggressive about getting that content out there and trying to convert it back into the funnel. Obviously, there was a huge advertising campaign that BT Sport were running, but that had to go hand in hand with a demonstration of what content people could find and the tone of that content. And so a big part of that was kind of sort of looking at what others were doing. And as you say, Sky did very, very little. You know, you would generally see a sort of a talking head from a studio, a person wearing a tie. And we really wanted to kind of get as far away from that as possible to try and at least be kind of something different. And so the strategy was kind of shop window, show people what they can get, and kind of be quite aggressive about getting it out there as well. And I think it happened at a time when video on Twitter specifically was kind of exploding, and we worked directly with Twitter to kind of get that kind of best practice model. And we had a couple of technologies that we use, like Grabio was a really big one at the time. I think we were one of the first kind of early adopters of that as a clipping and publishing technology. And I went on to use them at Rugby World Cups for World Rugby as well. I think it's a great platform.
Yeah, it's a brilliant tool. I think I've used it in every job since then, I think. So intriguing that the BT Sport execs were willing to take some gambles. Interested to hear from you what other innovations were introduced around the programming at that time.
I think one of the biggest innovations was around the tone of voice, and kind of I think it's fair to say there's a chap called Grant Best, who was kind of a bit of a champion for us in this field, and he allowed us to be kind of very relaxed. We didn't want presenters in shirts and ties, and it wasn't just to have a point of difference, but it was more to reflect the audience that we aspired to have. And I think it was right for the time. I think Sky's content looked a bit dated at that point, certainly in football, certainly in Premier League football, and we kind of wanted to run away from that as fast as possible. And then we were also, the talent were told, to be as nice as possible, give time to the digital teams to create content. It was going to contribute to everyone's success, that they would shoot like behind the scenes content for us, we would publish it, they would cross post it on their socials, and kind of that expectation was set quite early, that we're all in this together. This isn't an extra. This is part of your contract with BT Sport, and this is the tone, and this is the job. And I think that now is kind of standard across the industry, that if someone gets talent involved, they don't expect to then have a secondary rate card for an Instagram post. It's kind of part and parcel of what the job is.
And Rugby Tonight was one of the shows that you worked across as your remit, and I called it Rugby Club earlier and I think the reason I did was it felt like being at a rugby club.
Yeah.
And it really had the atmosphere of that, which was, to your point on tone of voice, really clever, because it's very inclusive of a rugby audience. But also what you did with social was put out really intriguing and engaging clips from that, which drove people to the show. So I'd love to hear a bit about what it was like to work with that really fun bunch of presenters and talent.
Yeah, it was great. It was great.
And producers as well.
Yeah, and I credit to James Hopkins, who was the main producer on it week in, week out. And I think he was brilliant to work with, and he understood that kind of the job was to be kind of relaxed and inclusive, and we wanted to show that the audience felt like they were part of. So we would always put questions out the previous week or across the social platforms, and we would come back to them. We would put @handles on screen. I think we were one of the first productions to actually put people's @handles on screen. So, you'd get them then screenshotting their content, sharing it with their friends. We're effectively putting the audience on television, was kind of part of the philosophy. The talent were brilliant, and kind of many, many times some of the other BT Sport execs would kind of come to us and say, how can we get the football talent to be a bit more like the rugby talent? And I think it's it's an unanswerable question, but I think it showed that we were kind of moving in the right direction. I think we were quite clever with producing the show so that it could be clipped as well. And I think thinking about that from the beginning is kind of, it's not the most natural thing in the world for TV producers to think about, or it wasn't at the time. I think it probably is a bit more now, to think about how you produce your show in a modular way so that whole sections can be clipped out and not have to be edited other than topped and tailed, and have a kind of evergreen life on social channels. And I think that was one of the main kind of drivers as well, because ultimately that's about efficiency and money saving. So it's getting as much money out of the big cameras as possible has always been something that kind of I've sort of had in mind when I've been producing anything.
And there must be lots of stories from that show you can't tell, but I wondered if there were any good ones you could.
I mean, there were loads of like pranks backstage. Like Ben Kay would constantly be hiding in toilets and turning the lights off so that when people would come in, he'd jump out against them while they were using the urinal and things like that. It'd be like, it's just, the group of presenters were clearly all kind of very close friends on and off the pitch. Many of them have played together for England, if not club level. And it was just, a really warm environment to be in. And I think the host that we had at the time, so it was often Craig Doyle, who just kind of slotted straight into that mold as well. And then we'd have um, Nick Mullins, Jill Douglas, you know, all really, really nice people. And I think the head of rugby for Sunset and Vine, Titus Hill, I think he did really well at kind of bringing together a team of people that really got on. And I think there was no room for kind of big egos. Not that they really exist in rugby in the same way that they do with other sports, but kind of, I think people kind of moved in and kind of they got the vote of confidence, and then they stayed for a long, long time.
The interesting thing is, I think, is that quite a lot of those people came from ESPN,
Yeah.
the sort of the predecessor, the previous rights holder, but it was a very different tone of show. I produced a few of those, with I think probably Derda's presenting and Jill Douglas as reporter, but it was very straight television, and then it went to BT Sport, and the tone of voice changed quite dramatically.
Yeah, and it was a conscious change. Like I think I'd put ESPN slightly in the same bracket as the sort of the old Sky content. Shirt and tie as opposed to polo neck. I think it's just a flippant freehand way of kind of describing it. And we wanted the content to feel more relaxed. And I think Sunset and Vine did the ESPN coverage as well, like before my time. But I think you do need to iterate and you do need to kind of be self-critical. And I think that was always something that Jeff and John, who, Jeff Force is now retired and John sadly passed away, but they were always very good at kind of getting you to be critical of what you did last season, what you did last run, and kind of iterate from there. And I think probably not enough producers do that and not enough channels demand it. You should be constantly trying to move your content on, trying to fit the audience better and the audience you aspire to have, rather than just the one you've got already. I think that was kind of part of the BT Sport philosophy is kind of we want to grow the audience. In that case, you have to, and especially in a sport like rugby, you have to demystify it. You have to kind of explain it to try and make it simple. So we had like Opta Team of the Week, and it was just a way of kind of comparing all the fly halves or comparing all the hookers or props rather than getting into the noisy detail of it. We broke it down with Opta. We assigned values to each player, but after each round it would spit out, this is the most effective number 7, this is the most effective fullback. And I think little things like that kind of just decode the game, you stand a better chance of kind of growing it. Rugby suffers for this, like in particular. And I went on to work for World Rugby, and I saw this kind of at an even deeper level. Like it is a confusing game if you're not already into it.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question actually. What was the biggest adjustment from working with broadcasters and Sunset and Vine, where innovation was at the heart of everything, to going to a federation like World Rugby?
Yeah, well, I mean, federations are really different. Like that would be my main takeaway for working for two of the biggest federations in the world. Um, they're organizations where the senior management is elected rather than recruited on merit. And that's not to the detriment of anyone I've worked with, but they just kind of culturally have a very different cadence to them, rather than a kind of a commercial drive, whether it's about, sales, eyeballs, whatever, it's just different. And kind of that whole thing of growing the game, protecting the game is sort of slightly intangible. And like, I prefer a sort of a more black and white target, really. So yeah, it was different. It was it was harder to innovate. I think you could get stuff done. It was kind of more of a ask for forgiveness rather than permission philosophy that I had to run with my team, and kind of that served us well. And occasionally we did have to ask for forgiveness, but that's part and parcel of finding out where the line is.
Obviously, you knew that there were going to be some challenges of working in a much more traditional structure than a Sunset Vine or a BT Sport or do something like Red Bull Stratos. But what breakthroughs did you manage despite the sort of the challenges of those structures?
Yeah, there were some challenges. I think tone of voice was one of the biggest ones. World Rugby had just rebranded from IRB, and it had the opportunity to kind of follow through that rebranding, kind of its audience facing work. So we worked quite hard in kind of creating a tone of voice and content that would get the audience we aspired to have, rather than just talking to the audience that we already knew we had. And I think that's a universal truth across federations, is they are full of people who are experts in the sport that they work in. And the danger is they only talk to other experts in the sports that they work in. And I think the aspirational growth of an audience, kind of, you have to be a bit different to that. So kind of, I don't want to say dumbed down, but kind of, we certainly made the content more accessible, more flexible, focused on more languages as well. And then we had some kind of more kind of nuts and bolts innovations, like speed tracking graphics on sevens players, because in a confusing sport, everyone knows what fast is, and kind of being able to kind of hero one of the key attributes of an athlete in that sport was kind of, that was a big one. And there was some pushback on that about data and privacy and who owned the data, but kind of we were able to demonstrate that we could do it really easily with a graphic system. We use Piero, which is like a really simple kind of pitch graphic system. You know, you measure the space, you measure the object kind of traveling from point A to point B, and you can assign a speed value to it. You know, it was really simple in the end. But I think it had been something that the business had trying to get off the ground for quite a long time. And HSBC, who were the main sponsor, really wanted it, but they were overthinking it. You know, they were sort of talking about measuring the chips in people's shirts and kind of getting that data after the fact. And, you know, we were able to demonstrate that, you know, we could pull it off with a laptop in about 20 minutes.
Okay, amazing. So I think 2019 World Cup in Japan must have been a highlight of that. You spent quite a lot of time in Japan.
Yes.
And which is not a straightforward place to work, or quite a different place to work from Europe. I'd love to hear some of the stories and how that was an experience for you.
It was amazing. It was utterly amazing. And I think, yeah, technically it's a very difficult place to produce content, not because it's harder, it's just really different. So, you know, they use different formats. They use really tiny OB trucks. So you'd often have to have 2 or 3 of them. So they all need to be linked together. You need a parking spot at a stadium that's big enough to park them all really close to each other so they can be all linked together. You know, it's just things like that are just really different and sort of slightly difficult. But I was really conscious that we wanted to produce a Japanese Rugby World Cup, not just a Rugby World Cup that happened to be taking place in Japan. And I think that was one of the driving forces of it. You know, if we're going to go to the difficulty of having the Rugby World Cup in Japan, it must feel special, and it must kind of chime with audiences across the world for being special that it's in Japan. And I think we managed to achieve that. You know, we worked with HBS on the host broadcasts. You know, they were utterly brilliant. There was a chap at IMG, Malcolm Fernandez, who did all of the branding, which went through everything from kind of on-screen graphics to kind of the look and feel of hospitality areas, and all of that stuff was utterly, you know, brilliant. And it was a great starting block for us on the digital content, because we had a package of assets that were flexible enough that we could just lift them and turn them into things online as well. Yeah, it was you know, a pretty special event, and I think I'd love to see the World Cup go back there. I think, you know, the ticket sales were brilliant, pictures were brilliant. You know, it was an amazing thing to be part of.
And the Japanese rugby team put on quite a show as well.
Yeah, I mean, just insane content, and our Japanese channels during the Rugby World Cup were the biggest ones, especially on Twitter. You know, Twitter in Japan in particular is vast, and it still is. And yeah, the pictures of the Japanese team doing what they did, especially against Scotland and Ireland, was absolutely brilliant. And working with a largely Irish team was hilarious. Um, there's a picture of kind of the whole team wearing Japan shirts and one person wearing an Ireland shirt, looking very sad in the middle. It's brilliant.
And the remit was to grow the game, and arguably you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of gloves off in terms of kind of tone of voice as well. It was kind of the high point of meme culture, and we really lent into that, even like turned Joe Schmidt into Kermit the Frog at one point. It was really good. We had a couple of really good agencies working with us as well. 50 Digital, or 50 Sport, they're now called, and Engage. And kind of there was something to be said for having two agencies, because I think they both felt a little bit competitive of each other. So they
Yeah.
were really kind of pushing each other creatively, and we were able to reap the benefits of that. And I think that's a learning going forward as well. Kind of on these big events, kind of a bit of competitive tension, I think, can pay dividends. That and one of the big things I left Sunset and Vine was building agility into your teams, because you never really know what's going to happen. And so I made sure we built quite a lot of agility into the team, and I'm glad we did, because it ended in a way that kind of we didn't think it was going to. With where the content went, it was something which kind of I think you just had to ride rather than dictate.
So what you did was continue to innovate and went to another federation. So talk to me a bit about
Yeah.
how you got into FIFA Plus.
Well, I left World Rugby thinking I'm done with federations, and I didn't do very well at that. So yeah, ended up going to FIFA, and the remit at FIFA was they wanted to start this thing called FIFA Plus, which was going to be FIFA's direct to consumer proposition. So it was going to be a platform where people could watch matches from leagues all over the world. They could watch the FIFA archive, which is not inconsiderable. We were going to commission original content, which I was responsible for, and they could also go there for fantasy gaming, results, highlights. It was going to be everything, and it did a pretty good job. So yeah, it was an interesting time. A lot of people started in a kind of team that was sort of internal but not internal. So that was kind of challenging in a way. FIFA's a very different sort of organization to World Rugby, but it still had some of the kind of hallmarks of being a federation, even though it kind of had deeper pockets and a bit more swagger.
And it gave you access to some extraordinary creative talent, because you had a budget to commission content, loads of content.
Yeah.
I mean, hundreds of hours of content. Probably the content piece that has the biggest journey or the most impact was Captains that you produced with Fullwell Entertainment. I'd love to hear about the process of commissioning that and then working with Netflix to get it out there.
Yeah, so the captain's proposal was it was waiting on my desk when I arrived, actually, because they kind of pitched it to a chap called James Marley, who was kind of putting the team together. And kind of that, along with a few other kind of pitch docs, were kind of the first things I worked my way through. And kind of one of the big things I wanted to do while at FIFA, if you're going to commission something, FIFA had to have a reason for telling the story, and it couldn't just be a story about football, because FIFA's the football federation. So we really wanted stuff that was kind of right in the wheelhouse of kind of a story that could only really properly be told by FIFA, and Captains was that. So the initial series followed 6 captains through qualification to the 2022 Qatar World Cup. And that was kind of point one. So we commissioned that as a straight commission. And then we started having conversations with Netflix, who were quite interested in getting access to the 2022 Qatar World Cup kind of behind the scenes. So I used the leverage of season 1 and the potential of a co-production for season 2. And we created a co-production that spanned those 2 seasons. So both of them are available now on Netflix and FIFA Plus. Season 1 follows, as I said, qualification. Then season 2 was kind of quite an experience, but it's the first time that FIFA had ever let cameras kind of behind the scenes properly from a third party producer at a World Cup. It was probably the easiest World Cup to do it because it was all in Qatar, so the stadiums were all quite close together. So we could be quite agile as the story unfolded. Yeah, we worked with Fulwell, as you say. Ben and Gabe Turner were both out there for pretty much the duration, kind of an amazing creative team to work with. And I think, yeah, the results, the documentary is amazing. Like, it's one of the things I'm probably most proud of. Obviously, it's done amazing numbers in South America. And I think it was like the #1 show in Latin America for the first kind of 8 months when it came out. And I think there's some shots in there that kind of really kind of are some of the most amazing things ever put on camera at a World Cup.
Yeah, and then you couldn't have bought the story. And you know, you can plan and plan and plan, but to have Leo Messi win the World Cup when you've been tracking him for so long, I mean, that's an extraordinary outcome for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that word agility again, doesn't it? Like, we put quite a lot of stock in following the Brazil team, and then they get knocked out. But luckily, we had great relationships with the Croatian team already through a film that I'd commissioned about their coming third in the 2002 World Cup in France. So, yeah, it was an exercise in agility. We were lucky that all the stadiums were so close together. It was long days when we're out there, but yeah, I think everyone kind of flew home knowing that we had some pretty special footage to go into the final program.
Yeah, that must have been. I mean, I can only imagine how fun that edit was. Extraordinary story. So I wanted to talk a little bit about innovation around rights at FIFA and the deal you did with digital rights for Brazil.
Yes, well, it wasn't really a deal we did. I think it's a deal that Globo didn't do. So we ended up with the digital rights for the World Cup for Brazil, for Brazil games, and this is one of the other reasons that FIFA Plus came into existence, and it's kind of that sort of battleship off the coast, isn't it? Like, previously, when FIFA went into rights negotiations, the commercial side would know that FIFA haven't got a platform to put it on. Now FIFA have a platform to put it on. I think it makes those conversations a little sharper. And I think this was the first case of FIFA being able to say, well, if you're not going to pay what we think they're worth, we're going to monetize them. We're going to do them ourselves. So at relatively late notice, we were told that we were the rights holder for Brazil, which was interesting. And kind of we scratched our heads for a bit and then came up with an approach of partnering with Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, not the Portuguese one, and his Twitch platform. So we would co-stream on FIFA Plus and his Twitch platform. There'd be a rev share model, which would make us kind of partners with him and him partners with us, rather than a straight kind of talent and commissioning relationship, which I think smoothed over a lot of the potential issues there might have been if it had been just us paying him to do something. He had a little studio at all the Brazil games. It was relatively mad, but he was able then to kind of. So he's in a unique position where a Brazilian player can score 2 goals in a match. Ronaldo can text him. Brazilian player finishes the game, sees a text from Ronaldo, and, I've got to go down to Ronaldo's studio. Just walks out of the dressing room wearing his stocks and the rest of his kit, and kind of then goes and sits on Ronaldo's knee and does an interview live on Twitch and live on FIFA Plus. And I think it shows the value of working with talent in a way that you're their partner and they're a stakeholder, rather than just that kind of straight transactional relationship. And I think that's something which we are seeing more and more. And well, I think E1's a good example of that, isn't it? Where you leverage talent, you leverage celebrity, but you do it in a way where they're a partner, a stakeholder, rather than just a commercial transaction happening.
I think, and yeah, E1 does have that, but we're seeing it. I mean, just this week with the Bundesliga rights in going to streaming platforms and to individual influencers, but also something that we've talked about before is the goal hanger model, and the presenters being brought in as a commercial partners
Yeah.
on the content they're producing.
Yeah, exactly. So you have presenters that are stakeholders. They're not paid a fee. Goalhanger will take off the production costs, and then the money that's left is split 3 ways or 4 ways, or however many presenters there are. And I think it's such an honest model. Like, it's such a sort of decent model. I think it's just like a really clean, elegant solution to working with talent in the online space. I think it's clever.
I wonder if we're at a tipping point actually where if you're not innovating around how your rights are sold or co-produced, then you're going to get left behind. I mean, we're seeing next year Premier League Productions moves away from IMG. Potentially the Premier League has its own OTT platform, and potentially it partners with individuals in each of the territories it might sell its rights to. But will we ever see a traditional media rights model where a Discovery, for example, buys all the Olympics again?
Probably not. Like, and I'd love to know from Discovery kind of whether they consider that value for money at the moment. I would likely say no, probably. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like, FIFA have a massive team that sell their rights globally. Like, and I know they're different in a way because their rights are so valuable, but like, that's a big overhead to have that huge team. And I think if you extrapolate that down, like, World Rugby has 2 people doing that, and really they only kind of service the big rights holders, and then they'll use an agency for everything else. Um, I think working with talent, and talent that have platforms, talent that have presence, and by platforms I just mean, like, it could be a YouTube channel. Like,
Mm.
as long as the kind of the numbers are there. Um, yeah, I think it's got to be at least worth looking at.
Um, so looking ahead, what excites you about innovation in sports media? What's going to change? What's going to happen? I know you're having some interesting conversations around the future of sports production and sports consumption. What makes you excited? But what do you think will stay the same?
I think fundamentally the building blocks of kind of good production and good stories well told won't change. Like, I think that has to be the sort of the foundation of kind of anything that gets innovated on top of that. I've been having some conversations with the Faculty of Futurology at the University of Hawaii, believe it or not, and they've sort of asked me to kind of come in and talk to them about some of their sort of media courses and seminars, and kind of look at kind of what the future of sports broadcasting looks like with the rise of AI, the rise of personalization, the rise of kind of virtual reality. And kind of one of the things that they wanted to know is kind of, where does it stop? Where's the natural endpoint? Kind of, where's the natural product? And kind of, could it be that a golfer 100 years from now has a subscription service whereby you can virtually, like, relive around at St Andrews with them during the Open, and in virtual reality you kind of experience it as they did, because the broadcast pictures are there, and AI is able to then do the stitching to make it more first person, but it's their IP because it was their experience. But so it's up to them to monetize it. And areas like that I think are really interesting. I think the rise of the athlete is kind of not going to stop. The rise of the kind of individual brands, that's not going to stop. I think it's going to be interesting seeing how entities like NFL deal with that, because traditionally they've been really good at kind of controlling their own brand. But then you see like people like Travis Kelce, who's going to become like even bigger and bigger now. How are they going to kind of suppress that, or will they bother to suppress that, or will they start doing partnerships with their athletes? I think things like that are going to be quite interesting across the bigger sports.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a question from Patrick, who interviewed me on the last pod, to throw forwards, and it's exactly relevant to what we're just chatting about. So 10 years from now, how will people be consuming sports content?
Well, I think it's like different weight classifications almost, isn't it? And it's kind of, there'll be people consuming it in exactly the same way. I don't know if that will be a bigger number or a smaller number. I fancy, it'll be a smaller number. And I think it'll be different on different types of sports content as well. I think the big events will stay, and you'll always have that one match or that one day that you'll say to your significant other, let's have so and so round for that. Those won't go away. I think they are few and far between these days, though. I think, even the Olympics, I think, is struggling to kind of replicate Super Saturday. I think for multi-sport events, those days might be gone, but I think for big global tournaments, the semi-final, the final, that will always remain. And I think those kind of big TV, big screen, share it with your loved ones moments will stay. But the growth of highlights, the growth of AI generated highlights, I've got a 13-year-old son. It's hard to imagine him sitting through an entire rugby match, but he will watch clipped highlights kind of wherever, whenever he wants to on his tiny little mobile phone. That will grow, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it puts him in a funnel, which might then kick him out into being someone who invites friends around to watch a final. But I think, personalized highlights will grow. I think virtual reality hasn't quite delivered on the sort of, it seems like 2 or 3 rounds of promises that it was going to be the next big thing, and I don't think it's quite delivered on that yet. But as screens get more sophisticated, you've got to think that there's a part to play in that. So those kind of in Stadia experiences that we're told virtual reality can deliver, you've got to be thinking that that's a space for it to happen as well.
Yeah, I think extended reality, so virtual and augmented, and aspects of immersive and spatial content. I think that's going to be really interesting over the next, months, years, and decade for sure. And the way I think about it, I've got a son who's slightly younger, and there's no way he's going to watch a whole sports match. I mean, he'll watch 5 minutes of cricket and then he'll run out to the garden and start bowling. But I think if he was involved in it, if he was in a headset and he was playing the game, or it was gamified in some way, I think that's what's going to be really interesting.
Or you can sit there next to someone who you go to school with who lives 10 miles away. I think that's the other thing of it as well. It can be a social experience. I think that's the thing that maybe people lose in the virtual reality conversation. It could be something that's shared. It doesn't have to just be immersive for its own sake.
And I think that's the critical thing about sport, isn't it? It's about shared moments, and that's maybe the common thread actually, that those shared moments do drive people to the bigger platform, to the whole sport, to the whole game. So if from creating the backstories to the Paralympic athletes, to sharing the goals on BT Sport, to what the future of consumption is, shared moments seems to be a bit of a thread.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I always had this philosophy with rugby sevens. So rugby sevens is it's a difficult ask, really. It's loads of games across 2 or 3 days, and for the visiting audience, World Rugby would always get quite annoyed when the sort of mid-afternoon kickoff and the stadium's like 2/3 full, if that, and people are off having beers and lunch. And I think you have to think about it it's like Glastonbury. Like, not everyone could be at the main stage all the time, and I think that's okay. And I think you need to understand what these things are to the audience and kind of be less precious about it. And yes, they'll all come in for Fiji versus South Africa, but don't worry that not everyone's watching the game 3 games before that. They're still there. They're still a participant. They're still enjoying their day. And I think that needs to be enough for kind of sports and rights holders. Kind of, you want to develop that sort of audience that becomes an advocate. You need to stop telling them what to do and kind of just accept the fact that they're enjoying it for what it is to them.
Yeah, they bought a ticket and they're buying your beers and your burgers.
Exactly.
Be grateful that they're there. Okay, lovely. Well, Laurence Hodgson, I think talking of shared experiences, let's bring you back in.
Thank you for welcoming me back. And yeah, I've been sat in the darkness listening astutely, and I think it's probably fair to say, arguably, this is much better than being at Glastonbury main stage. Sorry, Emily Evis. But no, I mean, what a conversation. what a joy to hear about your illustrious career, James. I think really intriguing peek into how audience needs have changed and are changing, how content distribution and therefore consumption will develop and must develop to allow us to, as you say, Laurence, continue sharing in those beautiful sporting moments. I mean, it was great hearing about the genuine collaboration across the teams you've worked with, James, right? I mean, how I think with rugby highlighting how ego rarely gets in the way, unless, of course, your name is James Haskell. But let's hope he doesn't listen to that. But if he did, he'd probably revel in the mention anyway. But I think the contrast between broadcasters working with federations really stood out as well. So I think I like how you describe federations as different with a slightly awry smile. But I think capturing that spirit of pushing forward, right? Sometimes asking for forgiveness rather than asking for permission. I think that really reflects the energy and drive that you had within your team, which is really, really cool. But it was awesome hearing about FIFA Plus, that bold new D2C platform, highlight being Messi's World Cup triumph with Argentina, how capturing that moment demanded agility from the team. But I think delivering footage so intimate that, as Laurence, as you gave a nod to, being a fly on the wall during that edit would have been an absolute dream. And obviously, you mentioned the win of securing digital rights for Brazil and Brazilian games. So obviously, that opened up more opportunities to engage lots of different audiences. Talent partnerships proved as important, right? The collaboration with R9, Ronaldo, Brazilian Ronaldo, and his Twitch channel, creating that genuine reciprocal relationship rather than just a purely transactional one. And that's actually quite a big part in my day-to-day work as well. So maybe, James, I don't know, in exchange for featuring on Playback Pioneers, perhaps you could grab me a seat in his studio, or maybe I'll give it one more episode before we ask for those kind of favors. But no, awesome conversation, guys. I suppose before we wrap things up, it's time for our fabled Playback Pioneers quick fire round. They were brutal and unforgiving last time, James. No, you'll be fine. But to kick off, first question: which fictional TV character do you secretly think would absolutely thrive in your job?
Oh, George Smiley.
Good choice. And what would the reasons be for that? Perhaps for the audience who might not know who George
I
Smiley
just
is.
think that very sort of quiet, strategic brain and able to kind of point people in the right direction without them even knowing.
I like that a lot. Laurence, what do you reckon?
Wow. Difficult. That's a difficult one. I mean, I
Mm.
was for some reason Jackson Lamb from Slow Horses was
Yeah.
the character that came into my head.
Yeah, nice.
But I don't know why.
I gave a little bit of thought to this as well, and the only thing I could think of was probably the whole of Mystery Inc. from Scooby Doo. I mean, we don't have an office dog, and I think if it was Scooby, I think it's fair to say the business would be in absolute jeopardy. But I think the points of collaboration, teamwork, enthusiasm, to an extent, detective work as well, I think play a big part in the day to day. So there's some good examples for you both there. Second question: which classic TV moment do you wish you'd produced or at least been a part of behind the scenes?
Do you want to go first, James?
Oh, I don't know. This is tricky, isn't it?
I mean, I'll dive in there while you think. So I think I used to produce a lot of cricket, and I think the 2019 World Cup final was one brilliantly produced.
Yeah.
I think to have Ian Smith and Nasser Hussain commentating at the end was absolutely genius, and it was an extraordinary moment. I think that lives long in the memory. So I was a little bit jealous that I wasn't in the hot seat for that one.
Was that the Ben Stokes one?
It was the Ben
Against,
Stokes one,
yeah,
yeah,
against
yeah,
New Zealand.
yeah, exactly,
What a match.
exactly.
What a match.
By
I'll
their finest of margins is what
Yeah,
Ian
it's
Smith
insane.
said.
Yeah, it's amazing. James.
I'll go for any of the stages of Geraint Thomas's Tour de France win. I think that is an event that I'm just left astounded by every time it's on television. I think it looks utterly
Yeah.
beautiful, and I think him winning it that year, I think, was just the best.
Yeah, magical TV. Talking of TV again, would be the theme on the podcast, but what's your TV guilty pleasure that perhaps you'd never admit on LinkedIn, but we'll share here today exclusively?
Bob's Burgers.
Yes, what a show. What a show. That is very good. That is very, very good. Laurence, can you top that?
A TV guilty pleasure. I mean, I love absolutely. I'm not sure if I feel guilty about it, but I absolutely love Hot Ones on YouTube.
Yeah,
And I will. I think you'll allow me the convergence of YouTube and television there.
100%. I will.
It's all content.
100%.
Have you not been listening?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Where have you been? But I think mine is not on par with either of those because those are actually fantastic shows. But Real Housewives. But there's absolutely no guilt involved in that one. I think my partner will be very happy to hear me broadcasting that. Not sure I'm ready to deep dive into a blog on LinkedIn, but yeah, I'll give it a think at least. What's one piece of pop culture, maybe a quote, scene, lyric that kind of low key lives in your head and maybe even guides your work decisions?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Um, and
Fantastic film.
any and all of the books, not the film. The film's atrocious. The books in particular. I think it's just kind of don't take life too seriously. Like, and it's only sport. Like, I think kind of that's what I get out of it.
Nice. That's quite reminiscent with the ask for forgiveness line, doesn't isn't it? Laurence, what
Oh,
about
that's a
you?
very good. That's a very good answer, James. I feel on the spot here. A bit of popular culture that is lives in my mind. I for some reason I've got Blackadder in my head, and I think the reason why is the last scene of the final episode.
Mm.
They didn't really know what they were going to do, and I've listened to podcasts and seen documentaries, and they fixed it in the edit essentially, with the freeze frame and fading to black and the way they use the music
Mm.
and I think it is about how creativity be can come from all sorts of decisions and all sorts of places, and that sometimes the mother of creativity is a challenge.
Mm.
So I think that final scene and how that problem was solved is always kind of there in the back of my head when I'm trying to solve a creative problem.
That was very poetic. I really enjoyed that. And to touch on what you said, nice segue into the next question, creativity wise. I mean, in your creative processes, if they had a soundtrack, perhaps, what would the three artists be on that soundtrack?
Oof. Sonic Youth, Nirvana, and the Sleaford Mods.
Oh, Sleaford Mods, fantastic. I saw them actually in Bristol at Forwards Festival a couple of years ago. Very, very good act. Laurence, what about yourself?
I'm gonna say Bob Marley, Fatboy Slim, and Groove Armada.
Fantastic choices. I think mine are a little bit left field as well. The Prodigy, just full blown energy. Santana, Lily Allen, Chuck Lily in there. Some
There we go.
Naughty's Goddess. Fantastic. And lastly, what's a moment in your career that felt like a deleted scene from a great movie, whether chaotic, unexpected, but kind of brilliant?
Behind the scenes, 2022 World Cup final. We're in the sort of the press rat run, waiting for the players to come through, and Messi comes out on the shoulders of Martinez, the goalkeeper. They're both topless. Messi's got the Jules Rimet in this hand and swirling his Argentina top around his head like that. They just freight trains right past us, and we knew that we were then going to go and join them in the dressing room with our cameras, and
Wow.
no one else was.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
That's an amazing moment. I think I think maybe the 2007 Cricket World Cup in the Caribbean, where it was just although as a spectacle it wasn't a great World Cup, and it wasn't organised brilliantly. I was a sort of 25-year-old kid out there, doing the thing I love most in the world in this incredibly beautiful place, and I absolutely fell in love with the Caribbean. Having already loved a couple of islands, I fell in love with the whole Caribbean. So it's a love story, a romance that will never end.
That is beautiful. I mean, mine comes nowhere close to those two. I think I was going to say this episode actually feels like a great movie, but close enough at least. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been such a, I think the word I'd use is juicy conversation. So it's been a pleasure listening to you both have a chat. And of course, Laurence, it's time to pass on the baton. So obviously you know how this works, but what's one question that you would leave for James, who will be in the host chair next episode?
So rather than looking forwards for the next guest, I think I'd like them to look back and answer the question, what's been the biggest innovation in content production in your career?
Very nice. I like it. That's a big ask, James. But look, thank you again. It's been awesome, and looking forward to seeing where the next episode goes. And look, finally from us, if you've been enjoying these conversations, don't miss out on the Playback Pioneers report that's just dropped. So it's our digital report documenting some of the people, communities, and companies defining tomorrow's playback experiences. So the report actually inspired this podcast, and it's an honor to have featured Laurence in it as well. So James, I'm sure will be coming your way for next year's report. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Playback Pioneers.